Welcome to this new special video in which we're going to talk a little bit about the French automotive industry. Since this week we learned that the iconic Stellantis factory, the Poissy plant, will stop producing cars in 2028. Taken out of context, some might see Stellantis' decision as just another news item with nothing serious about it. But if we zoom out a bit and look at the timeline, we realize that in recent years, and even more so in recent months, plans to close production lines and factories in France in the automotive sector have multiplied. I'll give a few examples. There was Renault's plant in Flins, France, which closed in 2024. In Aulnay-sous-Bois, the Emma France plant, a Peugeot subcontractor, also closed in 2024 in a few months in Strasbourg. It will be the closure of the Dumouriez Powerglide factory, which until now produced transmissions and gearboxes. But it will also be the closure of the Bosch factory in Isère, in the Allier region. And that's a non-exhaustive list. It's just a few examples of French automotive industry factories that have closed in the last 24 months. In today's video, I'm simply going to try to explain a little bit about the reasons behind it, what has happened in recent years for France to fall so far in the ranking of European car-producing countries. I hope this special video will interest you. If that's the case, don't hesitate to show your support for my channel for free. You can do that by leaving a like on this video and subscribing for the next ones. Just so you know, I usually give you daily summaries of automotive news. Of course, you can also boost this video and leave a comment to help improve its ranking. As usual, I'll start with some numbers so you can get a clearer idea of the situation. In 2000, France produced 3.35 million cars. In 2025, 25 years later, French car production dropped to 1.45 million units. Production was cut by more than half, with France ranking in 2002 among the top European countries in terms of car production, just behind Germany. The fifth position in 2025 behind several Eastern European countries that were once considered developing countries. In reality, there are three main reasons that explain this decline. The first, and probably one of the main reasons, is simply the decline of the French car market, but also the European car market. Since in France, a lot of cars are produced that are sold in neighboring countries. Once again, here are some figures to illustrate the situation. In 2019, 2.21 million new cars were registered in France. By 2025, this number has dropped to 1.6 million units. That's 600,000 fewer units per year. And fewer cars registered means fewer cars sold. And that also means fewer cars to produce in factories. So why are fewer cars being sold in France and in Europe? It's a bit of a separate topic that I've covered in other videos, but to quickly sum up the situation, let's just say that brands are now forced in Europe and in France to sell cars that either customers don't want to buy or can't afford to buy. In 2019, the average price of a new car in France was €26,000. In 2025, 6 years later, it's €36,700. That's €10,000 more, which the French simply can't afford to pay out of pocket to buy new cars as often as before. So it's pretty logical that if there are fewer cars to produce, the brands won't keep all the factories that used to run at full capacity. So on one hand, we have French people who are keeping their old cars longer and longer, and on the other hand, manufacturers who are adapting to this new situation. But there's something even more interesting when you take a closer look at the numbers. As I mentioned earlier, in 2003, 0.35 million units were produced, while only 2 million cars were sold in France during that period. To put it simply, that means we were producing enough cars for the domestic market plus cars for foreign markets. Whereas in 2025, for 1.6 million cars sold, only 1.4 million were produced in France. That means, as you can see, not only are French factories producing less than before, but also manufacturers are selling more cars in France that are made in other countries. That's the well-known offshoring, and it's a process that has been accelerating rapidly in recent years. Indeed, while in the past we mainly had to worry about Chinese, Moroccan, or Turkish factories, which French brands have already been using for many years. I'll give you a few examples. The Renault Clio 5 was produced in Turkey. The Dacia Sandero in Morocco, that's nothing new. However, what's new is that, in addition to having to deal with this external competition, French factories now also have to face internal competition. I'm talking here about Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and also Spain. 3 European Union member countries that French manufacturers now use to produce cars sold in France. Here too, I'll give a few examples. The Citroën C3 is made in Slovakia, and there are quite a few Renaults that are made in Spain. And by the way, just a quick note on this subject, it's not going to get any better over time because Renault in 2025 has confirmed that it will relocate the production of several electric models that were previously made in France to these Spanish factories. So why are brands relocating? Why do they prefer to produce in Slovakia, Spain, or the Czech Republic instead of France? The answer is very simple: the price. In fact, producing in these countries costs much less than in France. That's mainly due to two things. The first reason is obviously the cost of labor. It's much more expensive to pay an employee in a factory in France than in most other European countries. In France, the average hourly cost of an employee is 43 euros. In Spain, it's 23 euros. In the Czech Republic, 18 euros. And in Slovakia, 17 euros. You understand, it's impossible to compete with Slovakia, where the cost of labor is almost 3 times lower than in France. The second thing is the cost of energy. Because believe it or not, even though France is one of the best countries in the world when it comes to nuclear power, our electricity is still generally quite expensive. In 2025, the average price per kilowatt hour in France was 26 cents, while in Slovakia, for example, it was 19 cents. And if we look at gas prices, the difference is even worse. On average, the price of fuel in 2025 in France was 1.90 euros, while in Slovakia, it was 1.55 euros. It's not just that workers are more expensive, but running machines in factories also costs more. And since in the European Union there's what's called the free movement of goods, a brand can easily have its products made in Slovakia and sell all its cars in France without paying any extra taxes. So to sum up, in France, we have a declining car market and a very high production cost. And there's a third thing to add to that. This third thing is the electric car. And hold on, don't start commenting right away saying that I'm pro-electric. You'll see that what I'm about to tell you here actually makes perfect sense. And we have to acknowledge it whether we're against electric vehicles or for them. There's something that's completely inherent to the electric car, and that's indisputable. For an electric car to work, especially in its engine, it needs far fewer parts than a combustion engine car or a hybrid car. That's good for electric car reliability. On the other hand, it's not such a good thing for the French automotive industry, because needing fewer parts to operate also means fewer parts to produce. And that's not something I'm making up. That's directly from France Strategy, as well as the PFA, which is the organization that simply represents the entire automotive sector in France. Both say simplifying electric car mechanics will likely cause most parts suppliers to go bankrupt one after another in the coming years. There's also no need for exhaust systems or particulate filters anymore. Gearboxes are simpler. And that's not even considering the engine parts, since you need far fewer than with a combustion engine. On one hand, fewer parts are needed, but on top of that, different parts are required. Parts that French equipment manufacturers or car makers aren't specialized in for now, and maybe you could even say they're not as good at as other countries. And you can probably guess where I'm going with this. I'm talking, of course, about China. China absolutely dominates the entire electric car manufacturing chain, whether it's batteries, motors, charging systems, or platforms. They are far ahead, so it's only natural that French car makers who want to switch to electric turn to Chinese solutions that already exist, already work, and are often cheaper than European solutions for making their future electric cars. Be careful, you can't group them all together. Renault is still trying to manufacture electric cars in France, though some production is moving. Alpine is also in Dieppe. Factories in northern France produce the electric Renault 5 and Renault 4. There's Vercors, and there's ACC, Europe's leading battery maker, which has a factory there. But all of that combined is almost nothing compared to everything that's bought from Chinese suppliers to produce cars that are sold in France. In the coming years, with electric cars, we will need fewer parts. But on top of that, the parts we will need will mostly be bought from Chinese companies that don't produce in France. And when these parts aren't directly made in Chinese factories and are made in Europe, very often it's not happening in France. For example, CATL, a big, maybe even one of the biggest Chinese battery companies, when it sets up in Europe, it doesn't set up in France, it sets up in Spain. When BYD comes to manufacture in Europe to avoid taxes, it does it in Hungary. When Stellantis imports the Leap motor brand, it does it in Spanish factories. And when Chery decided to launch its Omoda and Ajeko brands, it did so by having them produced directly in a former Nissan factory in Spain. And at the time I'm making this video, there is literally not a single confirmed Chinese car factory project in France. Unfortunately, this video won't end positively, as several studies commissioned by the Ministry of the Interior show. It is estimated that in France, by 2035, so in about 10 years, the French automotive industry should see a decrease in its workforce of about 20%. So this is just the beginning. Unfortunately, we are likely to see more and more closures of parts suppliers' factories, as well as offshoring, since France is not competitive enough to become the nerve center of the European automotive future. But well, only time will tell. Maybe things will turn out much better than expected. Maybe the next Mozart of finance will manage to make car manufacturers want to produce in France again. And you, what do you think? Let us know in the comments. Of course, feel free to leave a like on this video and maybe even support us by clicking the join button below. It's thanks to the many supporters that special videos like this can be regularly funded to give a broader overview of the automotive world. Thank you all for watching this video. And hey, see you tomorrow for a new week of news. Let's hope it goes better than last week. Bye.